This could be you, but not if you listen to what I'm about to tell you, and make sure you pay attention because yes, there will be a quiz and it is strictly pass or fail. Hello, if you are one of the majority of the people that make up my viewer base, you fall into what governments call the latent reserve, which is a fancy word for dudes eligible for the meat grinder in times of emergency. If that does happen, you might just find yourself in a tank or armored vehicle in general. And if that also happens, one of your priorities is probably going to be not dying. So I'm going to tell you how to achieve that goal, for the most part. Blow out panel the like and subscribe button and let's talk about it. I'm going to be framing this critical life lesson by using this, an onion. Perhaps the same onion referenced in that one Call of Duty mission, but who knows. But I don't mean this onion specifically, that one is mine and only has a few hours before it is part of a pan-sheet ratatouille recipe in the description. No, I am in fact talking about this onion, the Survivability onion. This is an actual official product of the US government, by the way, and has its own post in the Science Diagrams That Look Like Shit Posts page. How it works is that your goal is to leverage the outermost layer as much as possible, and once that fails, you move on to the next. You can try to do all this at once, but the goal is to prioritize one at a time. And those steps, in order of precedence, are: don't be there, don't be detected, don't be acquired, don't be hit, don't be penetrated, and finally, don't be killed. By the way, that part is going to be in the quiz 100%, but if you leave a nice comment down in the comment section, I might provide a word bank for you guys. First on the list is don't be there. That might seem vague, but it has a lot to do with leveraging your own maneuverability, as well as actually making a half-decent battle plan. It's kind of like how I avoid driving down streets named after Martin Luther King Jr., even if it does add a few minutes to my trip to the grocery store. This could look like a few different things. For example, if the enemy has an ambush set up with some ATGMs, or there are known anti-armor threats in the area, just don't go there if you don't have to. I mean, you could get clever on the approach, take a longer route, or even halting the formation entirely to send a drone to scout ahead. But it's better than testing to see how realistic War Thunder penetration models are or aren't. This has a lot less to do with the actual speed of your tank and more to do with how you leverage the speed that you do have. That's not to say that speed isn't important, and we'll talk about that in a second, but it's more important about where you're going and not going rather than just how fast you get there. But one example that does leverage speed is leveraging cover. Tanks use cover just like people do, and you'd probably realize that you and a main battle tank have a lot more in common than you think, if only you were willing to open up more. Typically what that looks like is sitting in cover, dashing out to take a shot, and then dashing back into cover. If something tries to find where that shot came from, they're not going to see anything, because you followed rule number 1, don't be there. That leverages speed because it's important you duck back into cover, and the Russian T-Series tanks have a notoriously slow reverse speed, which is fine if your plan is to just blitzkrieg east until you hit the Atlantic, but not great if you want your tankers to reach retirement age. If you're in something with big guns but not a lot of armor, not being there has a lot to do with shooting and scooting. For example, in US doctrine, any kind of self-propelled guns should only go forward to engage a specific target, and then once it's taken care of, get back out of danger. Now, don't be there is probably the hardest rule to follow. Tanks aren't the main character in stealth games where they can just sneak around and still accomplish their mission. There is quite literally nothing on a tank that is not purpose-built to help it and its crew destroy things in the most violent way possible. Much like my cat Miso, they were designed from the ground up to kill. Tanks have to go where the fighting is to do what they're designed to do, so a lot of the time, not being there is impossible. And that brings us to the next step: don't be detected. Some people refer to this rule as don't be seen, but the reality is there are other ways to be detected as well. You could be heard from far away because, shocker, tanks are loud, and the tracks specifically sound like a crackhead trying to enact nuclear fusion by slamming bits of metal into themselves. Good lord, I hate that sound. You could also be detected electronically, either by triangulated radio signals, getting your battle management system pinged, or signals tracked. There's a lot that can go wrong in the don't get detected realm, and it's only getting harder every day. But a lot of it does have to do with not being seen. There's the obvious method of camouflage and painting tanks green or tan, depending on which environment you're expected to fight in. Not that the US military actually cares about that and still wants to paint everything tan. Leveraging things like tree canopies to provide some level of overhead cover or putting bits of terrain between you and the enemy help as well. The biggest issue you're going to run into is that tanks are very warm. According to the manufacturer, the exhaust right outside the back of an Abrams tank is 930 degrees Fahrenheit. Not only is that very dangerous, but also means that you glow on thermals brighter than a sun exploding. Ways around that are using things like multi-spectral camo systems, which insulate the tank's IR signature, or only transmitting on the radio during specific pre-designated times, while keeping network usage to a minimum. Many tanks have a low power or silent watch mode as it's called, which allows the tank to be turned off, making it cold and quiet, but still gives power to optics electronically that can scan for targets as needed. Other tricks include moving tank formations during particularly loud moments, like if there's artillery going on somewhere, which there probably is, or while an enemy force is already occupied fighting someone else. Generally, though, the easiest way to do that is to keep at least one terrain feature between you, so things like a few hills or deep woods, things that would either block the sound or divert it in a way that listeners wouldn't really know where it's coming from. But let's get realistic with ourselves. The hours you spent covering your tank hull in camouflage and digging defensive positions are probably pointless because the other side saw you with a $200 drone several hours ago after your loader had to take a leak in the middle of the night. And this brings us to don't be acquired. So the jig is up. Bad guys know where you are and they're going to try to start launching stuff your way. Being acquired means you have some kind of killing instrument pointed at you. However, it has not fired yet. It could be trying to get a lock on you, or it could be trying to align its sights, or get a laser returned for a fire control system. Or maybe their friend is having trouble opening up the phone app on his phone to take a cool shot of his buddy about to rock you with an RPG-29. Your job in that moment is to not let them do that. One of the easiest ways to do that, and I say that because it only requires you press a single button, is pop and smoke. These are launched from the seemingly random tubes you see sticking out the front of tanks. Some modern tanks are able to automatically deploy these as well. They do this when they detect they're being painted by a strong enough laser, one that would be used for aiming a tank gun or tracking for a missile. Now, the smoke in these isn't just random smoke, it's specifically designed for disrupting thermals and lasers, not just trying to block it. Most thermals can see right through dust and debris like it's nothing. So to get around that, countries use smoke grenades containing titanium dioxide, bits of brass or graphite flakes, or really anything to actually disrupt things, not just try to block it. Now this is where we get into a little east versus west differences. NATO-style tanks use smoke strictly for defense, almost primarily. They obscure right where they're at. Russian and/or Soviet-designed tanks use them more for offense, so when they fire them off, they land farther ahead of the tank, covering them as they move forward. For Russians though, older smoke launchers and still some modern leftover ones don't actually block thermals. And the way to tell if a tank is using old Soviet smoke versus maybe a newer kind is that the new kind will be all sparkly when it deploys. Very cool. But popping smoke while still being a family favorite is still a low-tech way, and we've come up with a few other techniques of breaking a lock since then. Some things like the Shatora 1, aka the glowing red eyes on the front of older T-90s, are giant infrared dazzlers that will confuse any kind of missile guidance. But these didn't work well enough for the Russians to keep them around for the M model. I don't care if they worked or not, bring them back, they look cool. China has a rumored dazzler called the JD3, which cranks that idea up to more, to the point where the dazzler could even blind whoever it is that they're aiming at. Technically a war crime, but I don't think they care. But while more and more tech is being brought out to make it harder to acquire tanks, sometimes it just means that if you see a guy with a cornet launcher looking at you, maybe go back the way you came if you don't think you can fire first. Alright, so you failed to listen to the last 3 things I told you, and the baddies have a solid lock on the tin box you call home. Now you've entered layer 4, don't be hit. This is literally your last chance before your day is pretty much ruined, so let's try to stick with the program here. Now this is very much going to depend on what is about to hit you. It takes a Russian 125mm Sabo dart roughly 1.2 seconds to travel 2,000 meters. You are not dodging that. Even if your driver is driver from driver, you ain't getting into cover in time. So in that realm, you're just gonna have to deal with it, unfortunately, and hope that they miss, because that's really your only option at that point. Now, luckily and unluckily for you, odds are it's not going to be another tank that kills you. It's going to be a drone, mine, missile, or combination of all three probably. Your first option is a hard kill active protection system, something that blows up whatever is coming at you mid-flight. These don't really work how they do in video games where you have to deploy them yourself. They're tied into a small network of radar sensors that can rapidly identify and track where an incoming rocket or missile is going to hit you. Once it's close enough, they automatically deploy, neutralizing the round, and then you go say a little prayer, both in gratitude that you aren't exploded, and that the port infantry that were next to you didn't suffer for too long from 2 explosions going right off in front of their face. It's not easy being a crunchy out there sometimes. APS systems, despite, well, pretty much every country talking about them, are still fairly limited in their use. The United States has been in zero hurry to really implement them currently. Russia only used limited numbers of them in Ukraine and to questionable results. And China has still only regularly shown them off in a handful of the latest armored vehicles, and even then, not really on their main ones. Part of the reason for this, outside of just pure cost and complexity, is that they haven't been the total game changer everyone was expecting them to be. They certainly have for the crews of the real-world reports that we do have, but on a bigger scale they run into some other issues. For one, APS systems were designed primarily for things like rockets and missiles. Most of the time, those are going to be coming from you directly at the side, or at just a slight vertical angle. More and more munitions, including a lot of drones or javelins, hit from straight up, which has proven to be difficult to counter. These also do nothing against mines or artillery, both of which will fuck up a tank all day long. Lots of money is getting dumped into counter-drone tech that's organic to vehicles. Things like drone radars, airburst munitions, autocannons on top, and jammers are slowly starting to catch up in the drone arms race. They're certainly not there yet, as is evidenced by every Telegram channel ever, but those folks are busy trying to figure it out, and God bless them for it. Don't get hit is probably on the harder side of things, because either you have the equipment needed to perform it or you don't. None of the people inside the tank actually have the power to put that into practice unless the gunner manages to start magically shitting out chaff out of his ass. So now we're into the spicy stuff. Also, the 5th layer of this onion applies not only to tank battles, but also to prison, and that rule being, don't be penetrated. Hopefully, your respective country's military didn't skimp out on the metalworks department, because now your tank armor is about to earn its metaphorical paycheck. Now, this layer of the survivability onion has its own sub-layer, and that is split into additional armor and organic/standard armor. Ideally, any additional armor you have will take the hit, leaving the actual tank armor perfectly fine. This is where we get cope cages and turtle tanks from. If the random pieces of rebar you welded around you get hit, not a big deal. Best case scenario, the crew gets to walk off to live another day, but these have been questionably effective at best, despite being so widespread. Attaching random shit to your tank for extra armor isn't anything new. There are tons of pictures of Shermans with improvised track armor, and we all love that one picture of Patton yelling at a tank crew for putting sandbags on the front. Typically, any extra armor you see crews putting on their actual vehicles doesn't work super well, but there are official versions of this like cage or slat armor that forces rockets and missiles to explode prematurely, or things like those little BDSM chain ball things on the back of Israeli tanks that do the same thing. T-90s have this little metal net thing that performs that job, and I myself have reinforced my own car with concertina wire I stole from the local National Guard armory. Of course, everyone's favorite additional armor is explosive reactive armor, which if you're watching my channel, I assume you already know what it is, but in case you don't, they're bricks of explosives that either cancel out the explosion that just hit your tank, or divert the force of a round in a more favorable direction, aka anything that's not just straight perpendicular to you. This is great because they're really easy to swap out and replace, and taking a hit on one section doesn't reduce the effectiveness of the entire system like if it was just a solid piece of standard armor. Now, there are still a few things to worry about, like anything that does manage to punch through your ERA, like a tandem charge round. And when it comes to how that's going to play out, unfortunately for you, it's going to come down to a couple things. 1, the angle at which you were hit, and 2, how good your actual armor is. Without going too much into how physics works, because I am not qualified to teach it, the farther away from a 90-degree angle that a thing is hitting you, the better. The actual strength of the armor in most tanks is classified information. We have some published numbers around the Abrams, but again, those are published numbers. Chobham-style armor is used by the UK and US. Germany has their own similar mixture of metals and ceramics on their Leopard 2s, and so does pretty much everyone that builds a tank. That kind of armor will keep you safe from pretty much anything that isn't a really good sabot round shot. And that said, the second your armor is hit, its ability to absorb more rounds goes down significantly, so best to keep it one and done. Of course, the actual thickness of your armor is going to be a factor here, and at a grand scale, Western tanks are pretty beefy in that department, other countries not as much, and Israel basically makes nuclear bunkers that happen to have tracks and a tank cannon on it. Most of that comes into how tanks were expected to operate. NATO-style tanks, in a broad sense, were expecting to be in the defensive for the most part, meaning they needed more armor, and the additional weight from it wasn't a big deal. Warsaw Pact tanks were expected to play an offensive role, leading to smaller sizes, thinner armor, and operating in smaller units than their opponents. Israeli tanks are expected to fight in urban settings, right next to or within their own borders, so it doesn't matter if they're big and heavy as shit, they ain't gotta go that far. Now for the grand finale of the video, in which every layer before this has failed. If the layer "don't be penetrated" was good for tanks and prison, this last layer is just good overall life advice. Don't die. Tanks ultimately are replaceable. The crew inside them, however, well, they're actually also replaceable, but it's cheaper if we can just reuse them. There are a few ways to keep yourself and your crew alive in the unfortunate occurrence that the high-priority target you are riding around in rapidly and violently becomes a pile of scrap metal. One of the biggest threats to a tank crew that gets hit isn't always the thing that actually hits it, it's the ammo inside the tank going off. There are a few ways around that. American Shermans used wet storage, Abrams and other similar tanks have blowout panels to contain ammo cook-off, and while this leaves the crew needing new pants and probably an ice pack, they're at least not going to know what the crews of many Russian tankers experience, and that being what it feels like to be launched into the actual sun. Those Russian tanks have gotten better somewhat, and things like unmanned turrets certainly help with that immensely, but a lot of that comes inherently from the orientation of the rounds in a Russian autoloader system. Other things like halon systems help put out fires inside the tank itself, which is great, but can still kill you from suffocation, so try not to panic too much from that one at least. Escape hatches under tanks used to be more common for the crew and are still seen in most Russian or Soviet tank designs, but the West got rid of them in favor of just brainwashing everyone with death before dismount. So remember kids, spending a few hours to plan a route to bypass a minefield is not sexy, but it's a lot easier than skipping straight to the core of the onion and praying that the engine is only kind of on fire. But of course none of this matters because someone is going to comment drone and call me a retard, but luckily that person didn't watch all the way to the end, but you sure did. And on that note, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please subscribe and I will see you in the next one.